Hey guys, welcome back to another video. John here, and today we're going to be talking about jigs. We're going to do a three-part series. It's going to cover all the different kinds of jigs that you fish with, from your Arky jigs, your flipping jigs, your football jigs, your swim jigs, pretty much anything you can imagine. We're going to try to cover. We're going to cover the 6 primary types of jigs. We'll throw in some honorable mentions there at the end for other things that are jig-like in nature. So this is part 1. Stay tuned, and here we go. Okay everybody, welcome back. This is the jig series, part 1. We got the Arky jig, we got the flipping jig. We're going to go over really quickly how to rig these baits, how I like to rig these baits, and then we'll get to the on the water footage. First bait up is the Arky jig. Whoops. Now, as you can see from the head on this thing, it's got a rounded kind of combination of a bullet head and a flipping jig head. Got that really good weed guard on there. So what I do with this type of bait is I will typically rig it with either a twin tail grub or possibly even a beaver style bait. So let's go through how I like to do that. Here's the beaver bait. This is a Reaction Innovation Sweet Beaver. I'm simply going to take this thing, and I rig them a little bit different than other people. I'm going to take that bait, I'm going to open that hook, hold the brush guard back, and I'm going to run that thing through the back portion of the tip just so I get a little more meat in it. I'm going to curl that thing on, and I'm going to curl it on a little bit further than some people will, and I'm going to run it out usually in the last 2 or 3 or 4 ribs on the back of this of the beaver, and it gives it a little bit of a curl there. You see that? See how that bait is curled? So when that thing's sitting in the water, if you can imagine it's sitting on the ground like that, then it gives that really good defensive position. You know, it curls up well. If these are separated, which these are not, it really looks like a crawdad really well. So that's how I rig the Arky jig. Now, this jig, and this one's a little bit beat up, but this is the flipping jig. You can see that more bullet-shaped head. Sorry, it's all beat up. I grabbed a bad one. One that's caught me a bunch of fish. I actually trimmed the weed guard on that a little bit. I cut the front 3 weed guards off just so it gives me a little bit more hook setting ability. So when I do that the same thing. I like with my flipping jigs to use the Reaction Innovation Kinky Beaver. You can see it's got these appendages that hang down on there, but I rig it exactly the same way. I pull that weed guard out of the way and I run it from the back side. I curl it up on there into that last little grouping of the ribs on there and give it that really good curl. Now, that does a couple of things. There's less hook exposed, which is not a bad thing when you're setting the hook, because this thing, they move out of the way really easy to get enough hook in there. But it really, again, it's that defensive posturing position of a crawdad or whatnot when it's sitting on the bottom like that, and it really gives it good action. So this is the first part. This is the 2 jigs that we're covering. The bullet head, the flipping jig, and the Arky. Alright, this is jig number 1. This is an Arky jig. It's got that unique rounded head. This jig can be fished in a lot of different situations, from flipping it in the grass to throwing it around docks. It's probably one of the most versatile jigs that you can use. Now, the way I like to fish this jig is I like to cast it out. Right now we're sitting in about 20 feet of water, so I'm going to cast it out onto a point. I'm going to give it enough line so it sinks to the bottom, and once it gets to the bottom, this is a rocky area. Normally I would be fishing this with a football jig, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to show you guys how we do this. So now it's almost on the bottom. I still got good tension on the line. Let me get us corrected a little bit. So we're on the bottom, and essentially what I'm going to do with this thing is I'm going to drag it and shake it a little bit. So dragging And then when it gets a little bit of resistance, I'm going to shake it around that resistance. It's going to pull right through it. This is kind of you fish this similarly to a flipping jig or a football jig, except you combine kind of the two approaches with one shot. So drag until I feel some resistance. Get a little resistance there, and I just kind of shake it through that resistance. That could be grass, that could be a rock, whatever it is you want to get around. So that's the Arky jig. Flip it around docks, throw it through grass. It'll do a lot of good things for you. The trick to this one is, this is your most versatile everyday jig. You can throw this at just about any lake. It'll substitute a football jig in a pinch. It'll substitute a flipping jig in a pinch. So that's the Arky jig. Jig number 2 is a flipping jig. Now this jig has a unique, very unique head shape. It's like a football but inverted the other way, more like a bullet shape. This jig, I wouldn't normally fish it on a deep water lake like this because frankly, it's a flipping jig, and this isn't a flipping jig type of situation lake. This is a football head lake for me. Is what I would primarily use. The jet skier just cutting between us and the bank. So what I do with this one, and I'll show you guys my techniques, even if I'm casting this through some heavy weeds, which it goes through the weeds phenomenally, much better than the Arky head, much better than a football head. This is the ultimate jig for fishing heavier weeds and around docks and up shallow. So I throw it out there, I throw it to some shallower water, I'm letting it sit there. And the way I'm gonna fish this jig, and I'll pull it to me a little bit, is the way I like to fish this jig is I shake it, and I shake the crap out of it. Now I'm barely moving it. You can't see the line very well. You know, we're at this emerald green water, but I'm just shaking it a couple inches every time. That makes that jig just flutter in the water just barely, and it really works its way through weeds, around docks, around heavy cover really easily that way. And you know, with this one, you know, I do a vertical hook set with this. I would always recommend a vertical hook set with the Arky jig as well, but I'm just gonna shake it. I'm just essentially popping the line. That's all I'm doing, popping the line. And that's just making that jig just poof, 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 poof. It really looks like a bait fish struggling. It really looks like a crawdad struggling. And when I get that bite, I reel down until I feel that weight and get that really, really good hook set. So that is our flipping jig. Let's reel it back in so you can see it. Again, this is a Pepper, what they call the Pepper Pro. It's a very, very, I like it, very effective jig. It's probably my go-to 90% of the time for fishing in and around California. This color is called Delta Magic. It works great on the Delta, obviously. And so that is our flipping jig. All right, so this has been part 1 of this video covering the Arky jig, covering the flipping jig. Again, Arky jig, your most versatile jig you can possibly use. I fish all of my jigs unless I'm fishing them in really, really heavy cover. I like to fish them on fluorocarbon. I like P-Line Halo. That's my preferred brand. I've been using it for years without any issues. I really like it. But, you know, primarily, you're gonna have to decide situationally. If you're flipping in really, really heavy cover, go to that heavy braid. If you're flipping in lighter cover, you know, maybe you can go like on a clear water lake like this, you can go with this, you know, fluorocarbon or whatnot. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit the like and subscribe button, and stay tuned for part 2 where we'll be covering football head jigs and tubes, since tubes, you know, they have a jig head in them and all that. So stay tuned for that.